Hello, hello, my fellow nerds and accidental sociologists. Welcome back to DepDiv Podcast, the only show where you can dive deep into human folly without actually getting wet, except for maybe drowning in statistics. I'm your host, and today we're going to talk about a topic so hot it could give your popcorn a sunburn: China's demographic crisis. Yep, the country that brought you bubble tea, giant pandas, and TikTok dances is now starring in its very own aging disaster movie. And spoiler alert, the plot twist involves an aging native emperor who apparently didn't get the memo that a country needs more babies than retirees. So buckle up, grab your favorite calculator or a therapist, and let's get started.
Wow. Yeah, that line, it just hits you, doesn't it? It's more than just a clever quote. It really gets to the heart of the irony here. This is the stark reality for a nation that's now facing a future it literally engineered for itself. And that future, it's showing up way, way ahead of schedule, which, of course, leads us to the big question for today. Right? It feels like it just happened all of a sudden, but it's really been this slow-motion train wreck that just, bam, slammed into high gear. So how on earth does a country with 1.4 times billion people end up in this spot? To figure that out, we've got to go back, way back, to the decisions made decades ago that set this whole thing in motion.
Okay, so let's start with where things are right now. For what felt like forever, the only story you heard about China was its unstoppable, meteoric rise. But underneath all that, this massive demographic time bomb was just ticking away, and it's actually a textbook and frankly terrifying example of this famous economic law. And that law is Dornbusch's law. I know, it sounds super academic, but the idea is simple and it fits here perfectly. It basically says crises build up really, really slowly, and then they just explode all at once. It's like leaving a cake in the oven for 40 years. For a long, long time, it seems fine. Then you open the door and poof, it's just collapsed into a pile of ash. That's exactly what we're seeing. Decades of these slow brewing population constraints, and then a sudden, shocking drop. It's a demographic heart attack. And here is the result of that heart attack. I mean, just look at this. The whole story for decades was about a young, super vibrant China that was going to power the global economy. But the reality today? Well, China's median age is now higher than in the United States. Just let that sink in for a second. The country we all thought of as the world's youthful engine is actually getting older, faster than almost anyone saw coming.
So, the big question remains, how in the world did we get here? Well, to get the answer, we have to rewind the clock, back to what one author called China's most radical experiment. We're talking about a policy so extreme, it didn't just tweak society. It fundamentally rewired the very idea of family itself. And this is where it gets deeply personal. This wasn't just about spreadsheets and population projections. We're talking about a massive human toll. I actually have a friend who lived through this, and his story is just unbelievable. He and his wife decided to have a second child, but they had to do it in total secret. Imagine living with that constant fear, to the point where you even have to hide your own son's existence from his older sister. For years, they told their daughter that this little boy was her cousin. It wasn't until the kids were much, much older that they could finally sit them down and reveal the truth. Can you imagine that conversation? That story just perfectly captures the human cost. This policy didn't just create demographic charts. It created a whole generation of family secrets and lies. And here's the kicker, the really wild part. This extreme, life-altering policy, it might not have even been necessary. Just look at this timeline. Back in the 60s, yeah, the average was 6 kids per woman. But by the late 70s, before the one-child policy was even a thing, that number had already plummeted to 2.3. That was thanks to more moderate policies and just normal societal development. China was already heading towards a stable population. But for the powers that be, apparently that was just too slow. Now, before we go any further, let me interrupt my own deep dive, because who doesn't love a self-promo? If you're enjoying this sarcastic ride through population economics, make sure to hit subscribe, leave a review, and maybe even send me a meme about aging emperors. Reviews help me pretend I'm relevant, and subscriptions help fund my coffee addiction, which, frankly, is probably responsible for half of today's coherent sentences. So go ahead, do it. You know you want to. Okay, we're back. And this next part, this is where the story goes from tragic to just plain absurd. We're going to dig into the science, and I'm using heavy air quotes here, that was used to justify this whole thing. Because, spoiler alert, this wasn't science. This was a bunch of politicians thinking you could plan a society the same way you build a missile. And it gets better. They literally got an actual missile expert to draw up the plans. No joke, his name was Song Jian. This guy wasn't a sociologist, he wasn't an economist, he wasn't a demographer, nope. He was a Soviet-trained engineer whose entire job was figuring out how to get missiles from point A to point B. And he looked at China's population and thought, yeah, I can solve this. It's just a big engineering problem. And that right there is the epic, catastrophic flaw in all of this. You've got missile control theory on one side. It's linear, it's predictable, it's all math. Then you have human society. It's messy, it's emotional, it's completely unpredictable. They tried to apply the logic of one to the other. They built these models to optimize the population down to a perfect 700 million, as if people were just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's just mind-boggling. Now, to be fair, China wasn't totally alone in thinking this way. Over in the West, there was this huge panic going on, sparked by books like The Population Bomb. It made all these terrifying predictions about overpopulation leading to global starvation. So the idea was out there. The crucial difference, though, is what happened next. See, in the West, these ideas were thrown into the ring and people got to argue about them. There was this famous bet between Paul Ehrlich, the biologist who wrote the book, and an economist named Julian Simon. Ehrlich said, we're going to run out of everything. Metal prices will skyrocket. Simon said, nah, human ingenuity will find solutions and things will get cheaper. They bet on 5 metals over a decade. The winner? Julian Simon, by a landslide. Every single one of those metals got cheaper. That's what's supposed to happen, right? Bad ideas get challenged. But in China, there was no debate. Not a chance. The political decision had pretty much already been made. Song Jian's report, with all its missile control math, wasn't a theory to be tested. It was the scientific-sounding justification they needed. It became absolute dogma. You couldn't question it. Anyone who tried was silenced. It was the absolute perfect storm for a disaster. A top-down system that needed an answer, and a scientist who gave them the one they wanted to hear. And that brings us to today. The Great Reckoning. This is the final act, where we see the inevitable, devastating consequences of that experiment. The bill has finally come due, and, well, it's a big one. Probably the most visible scar left by the policy is something called the 4-to-1 problem. Think about it. You have one child who is responsible for their 2 parents, who are in turn responsible for their 4 parents. So you have a single person at the bottom of this pyramid trying to support 6 people above them. One young person is left with this absolutely crushing burden of caring for 2 parents and 4 grandparents. For a country that got old before it got rich, that is just an impossible weight. And if you want to see what that pressure looks like on a national scale, just look at these projections. It's estimated that next year, something like 20 million people in China will retire. 20 million. Now, how many new workers are coming in to replace them? Well, based on births from last year, it's around 9 million, less than half. How does a society even function when you have more than 2 people leaving the workforce for every 1 person entering it? The math just doesn't work. It's a dependency cliff. And the young people in China? Oh, they see this crystal clear. They feel that crushing pressure every single day. There's this phrase that's gone viral among them. No marriage, no kids, stay safe. And you know what? It's not just some cynical meme. It's a totally logical, if heartbreaking, response to the situation they're in. They're looking at this impossible economic reality, and they're just opting out. So we're left with this one haunting question, aren't we? When a country treats its own people like an equation to be solved, what is the very real, very human cost of getting the math so horribly wrong? And there we have it, China's demographic disaster, served with a generous side of sarcasm and a dash of nerdy lament. Huge thanks to our producer, FireflyHaku, for editing this episode without getting too existential about population pyramids. Seriously, without him, I'd just be talking to my houseplants, which, let's be honest, don't care if we're all aging catastrophically. Thanks for listening, dear humans and accidental demographers. Remember, populations age, policies misfire, and my friend's second kid is probably going to be the smartest in class just for surviving the bureaucracy. Until next time, stay curious, stay sarcastic, and don't trust engineers to predict your social life or your birth rate.